Well, welcome to another episode of the Let's Grab Coffee podcast. Ty, I appreciate you finally doing this.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, excited to have you. I mean, I always, officially before we start, we got to cheers to coffee.
Yeah.
I know you got a good latte, so
Salud.
cheers, man. Salud. So today you're known as the General Counsel, Chief Compliance Officer for Doral Renewables, which is an owner, operator, and developer of renewable energy assets across the U.S., portfolio of about 13 gigawatts and over $2.5 billion of long-term power purchase agreements with U.S. customers.
Yeah.
You're a father. You've become a good friend. And as if though you don't have enough on your plate, on the side, you're very passionate about anti-hunger and advancing a lot of advocacy, policy work, awareness, education, specifically for the Chicagoland area that addresses, a lot of the hunger issues that we might have in the city, which I'm really excited to get to in a second. But again, thank you for being here. I've been really excited to share your story.
Yeah, no, I'm excited to be here, man.
As I said, before we started recording, we're going to start all the way from the back, all the way from the beginning. And you have a very fascinating trajectory. It's one where you start in New York, you come to Illinois, you get your JD at the University of Illinois, shout out to U of I.
ILL.
Right? Big law to renewable energy, and now obviously as an executive at a very fast growing renewable energy business called Doral. If we sort of rewind the tape, I really want to zone in on, what were some of those early experiences, influences that shaped the way you think about the trajectory that you ended up having?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. So I grew up in Philadelphia. I grew up in West Philadelphia. My parents divorced in '89, and my father moved back to Central PA where he's from. And so it was me, my sisters, my mother, and then my maternal grandparents. My grandfather is a Baptist minister for 51 years. So we were, in his church. And for those who know what that means, we were the pastor's family. We sat in the front row. We had to be present and presentable for everything that was happening. And so I got to see him lead, but also be a cornerstone in the community, in the way that certain leaders are separate from it. Certain leaders have more of a Wizard of Oz gaze on things, and some are leading from within. And I think a lot of religious leaders, they are leading from within. So that was something I got to see from a young age. It was something I got to shadow. That was something that really, I think, influenced me. Like, you can do great things and you can be a human. And so I didn't get to see people until much later who felt like they had to be a little standoffish and a little less human, which was good for my formation. I didn't have anything I wanted to be. I could have been anything. I loved creating things. I still love creating things. I love solving problems. Randomly, when I was 16, I got information about a legal explorers program in Philadelphia. I don't know if they still do it. There was legal explorers, police explorers, health explorers. And basically, I signed up, and for a year, every Thursday after school, I would go to a law firm downtown on 17th and Market. A law firm doesn't exist in its formation anymore. It was Ballard, Spar, Andrews, Ingersoll back then. It's since split into various firms. And we would spend an hour or two with these lawyers. They would teach us, we'd run moot court competitions. They would talk to us about what they did. We each had a mentor who was a younger associate. I got to see, these folks in this law firm, which is not what's represented typically in popular culture nowadays. But then it was really like in a courtroom. It was Matlock. It was Perry Mason. I was lucky enough to get to see, my mentor was a Black man. Again, very rare in those scenarios, who also, I got to see a younger associate. I think he's still practicing right now. But at the time, a younger associate kind of, talking about his path. I came out of that and I said, that's what I'm going to do. That's what I want to do. I'd asked enough questions to figure out how to do it. And I said that, okay, I'm going to finish high school. I'm going to go to college. I'm going to do 4 years. I'm going to go to law school. I'm going to do my 3 years there. I'm going to come out, join the largest law firm in the world. And that's what I'm going to do. That's largely what I did. So I graduated. I went to New York, spent 4 years in Manhattan, graduated from Hunter College with a degree in urban studies, and then came to U of I, met my wife there, day one, finished law school, U of I, left, and then joined DLA Piper in their DC office at the time, practicing real estate finance. From there, the path kind of, became about intention, right? I got there, I realized that what I didn't want to do, not that there's anything wrong with it, was to be some of the career partners I'd met. What I really was excited about was some of the clients we met. We would do these pitches, we would go to these dinners, and some of these people seemed like they were, just engaged in a lot more of the problem solving that I was looking for. There's for some folks, we want to hone what we do within a bubble, and you come to me when I can service you because my expertise is within this bubble. And for other folks, you're constantly finding new bubbles, right? I constantly want to be at this position of point zero. I know nothing about this. It's very frustrating. It can be very embarrassing. It's very lively. And then I'm going to figure it out. And then I'm going to tie it back into something else that, and keep building this scaffolding. And that's really where I wanted to be. So my wife and I, she's a lawyer as well, our travels kind of took us around. We went to practice in San Francisco at a firm called Hanson Bridget for a little while there. Also still doing development work primarily. I had done government development. I had done commercial development, hospitality. I did a lot of healthcare when I was in California, the development and the finance. Came back to Chicago in January of 14, I want to say. And we, briefly joined a firm here, Goulden Ratner, wonderful firm, doing more bread and butter, commercial development and finance. And then an opportunity popped up to go in-house. And I took that and never looked back.
It seems like, that's super interesting. Especially I didn't know how you got into the legal space.
Yeah.
So it's quite interesting when you talk about, access, especially at that age, like getting exposure, getting programs that put you in front in a physical way, right? Yeah. It's not theoretical. It's actually giving you the real experience, at least in small doses.
Yeah.
But how important that is. Curious for you, Ty, early on, like how important were mentors, figures? It seems like you had one that you mentioned briefly, but how important was that just to figure out your career trajectory, your growth?
I mean, they were huge, right? So I was always intentional. It took me years to figure out that was the way to describe it.
Mm.
But I was always the person who wanted to figure out how something worked, right? And I was going to take apart the TV that broke that we were going to get rid of, and then try to put it back together, and then put it back together wrong, and then find someone's parent who was an engineer, and then bug them until they explained to me why I put it together wrong, right? And here's what broke and things like that. So I always wanted to kind of figure out, okay, I want to do this. What are its component parts? How do I break that out? How do I sequence that? And then how do I execute on it, right? And then now I finished executing on it. How can I make it better the next time? Like that was always the way my mind worked. And a lot of folks who were mentors or sponsors were really helpful for that, right? Because they could provide that information, they could provide the nudge, the direction.
Mm.
There are people big and small who are just helpful. I always was fortunate to have people who saw some possibility in me and would, come along and kind of help shape, sometimes a little bit, sometimes not. I mean, there were neighborhoods where I grew up or I would go that were not the safest place for folks who were not from around there. But they knew me. They knew my family. They knew, that some members of their family were at the church. They knew my mother, who's a child psychologist and worked in a lot of these underserved communities. Our whole life still does.
Mm.
And so they would say to me, no, you don't want to be over here. You want to go, some variant of, I see great things for you. You go over here, right? How do I help you get to where you need to be? And that was, for me, that's been everything. So
almost like block and tackling.
People would block and tackle. People would say, I see your path, right? I see your path. I want to make sure you stay on that path. And I want to help give you whatever guidance I can, unsolicited often, as you know, when you're younger, about how you get on that path, right? And that was, I look back, that was everything, right? People were always excited about the possibility that was in front of me. And they used that to sort of help me move forward in areas where maybe I needed help navigating. Teachers, random people in the community, peers, religious leaders, family members, bosses. That's always been something that's been helpful for me throughout my career.
Yeah. I can see why being in the position you are now, this is something that's super important for you.
Yeah.
As you look, and obviously we're all a work in progress in our careers, but, wanting to be a mentor figure for the up and coming.
Yeah.
I'm sure that it's very important for you because to your point, it's something that's uncalled for, right? Like it's not something that you raise your hand and ask like, hey, can you please be my mentor directly? But
it happened.
It happened.
Yeah.
And how important is that looking back?
It's huge. There's a survivorship bias, right? What we miss in these stories is, how many people when I was in law school did I email or message for an informational interview who never responded or who responded and said no, right? Versus the ones that I actually got to talk to, right?
Made the time.
Yeah.
Even that 30 minutes, right? An hour.
People would say, hey, just reach out to folks. And I would do that. And I would sit down and I would have a spreadsheet and I'd reach out to 100 people and 2 would respond. And so every time someone reaches out to me and I'm like, hey, can you talk to this person? I do try to find a way to make time because I remember what that felt like. And I remember how valuable it was for someone to just have an informational interview, answer these questions, just to be a sounding board, to say, hey, you seem to be on the right path, right? Keep going, right? There's nothing I can give you here, but you have not gone astray is huge. And so, yeah, where I can, I try to lead from when have I felt undervalued, underutilized, and how do I make sure that the people around me don't feel that way, right? That we say that from a leadership perspective. How do I felt with the worst bosses I've had, and how do I make sure that my teams don't feel that way on a daily basis is something that's stuck in my head on a loop. Yeah.
Mm. You talk a lot about intentionality. It seems to be like if I were to do a word collage, it's like the center point of that picture.
Yeah.
Looking back, when you started your career in big law environments, there's always a debate, right? Some people love big law environments and they love the sort of growth from associate to partner, and it's great milestones over time. And some people really don't like that environment, and they love being an in-house lawyer. And having now seen the two, looking back with intentionality, what are some of the things that you loved, being in big law environments, starting your career in big law, and what are some of the things that you maybe found a little bit limiting?
Yeah, I think the rigor in a large law firm is indispensable. I don't think I could do what I do or could have done what I have done in the past in my in-house career without my earlier years in private practice. You've got large groups. You've got people who have seen, every permutation on a type of transaction. You have people who really care about the platonic form of what you're doing, right? The absolute right way to do it. And
the perfectionism almost.
The perfectionism of it. And it's a structure that's meant to bring people up, right? You're on this conveyor belt of sorts. And so there can be clear expectations about where you should be at year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, and whatever different nomenclature some firms will use to talk about the seniority track. There are expectations. They're not always clear, but no place is perfect. But there are expectations, and there are people whose job it is to push you in that direction, right? And so that rigor, that the training of it all. I was lucky enough to be in a development space when there weren't a lot of lawyers doing that because of the recession. And so I was the only associate on a lot of deals. And so, or there may be one other person, and we're supporting a ton of partners enough counsel. So I got a lot of work. When we were drinking from the fire hose, you got to just get in there and repeat it until you got it right, and then repeat the next thing, and then repeat the next thing, and repeat the next thing. And I love that. I think that's such a critical, for those who are fortunate enough to be able to have that part of their path, it's such a critical training mechanism. Obviously for the firm, it's also great too, because then some people will stay and you've trained them to be partners, and some people will leave, and like me, and we're forever grateful. And we also understand the skill that exists within walls like that, or even within walls like this, because I know that structure, right? I know that structure. I appreciate that structure. That structure isn't for everyone. I would say if you can go there, it should be for everyone for a time. It doesn't mean it's for everyone forever. Nothing is forever, right? I think we need to be malleable about what our path looks like long term. But it is an indispensable structure to understand what you're doing. And I've run into people who are very deep in their career, and I think don't have certain fundamental skills that I gained just being in that rigorous process, right? Where they're, nope, it's not right. It's not right. It's not right. It's not right. And it can be compared to, the videos and the movies of people training under a very harsh chef, right? But there is something about when you come out of that process, you are better. You are better, and that carries you forward for the rest of your career. Yeah.
I treat it very similarly to, like, on the business side. It seems very similar to the kind of training that you would get, say, hypothetically, in an associate program, like a General Electric back in the day, right? Yeah. Maybe a Procter and Gamble, the McDonald's of the world, like the large corporates that would give you almost like a real life MBA.
Yes,
right?
Exactly.
And it's very processed and it's very tiered. The expectations are there. There's elevation if you're performing and executing.
It's modern apprenticeship in a sense. And it's, and again, it can be recreated in other ways, but I think in terms of what exists now in our ecosystem is indispensable. There comes a time when what you're doing at the learning side changes into the execution and changes into the ownership, right? The building of books of business. And you have to decide at each phase in that evolution, is that what you want to do?
When did it click for you that, this might not be, look, I had a great time. I leveraged a lot. I benefited from this process, but I'm grateful for it, but I'm ready for a different chapter. Like, was there an inception point for you at all?
it kind of came over time. Like I said, I would interact with folks and I was intrigued by what they did. And some of them would take the time to kind of talk to me about it. I would gather that information right intentionally wherever I could. And for me, I said, look, someone's a managing partner of a firm. Let me step back a bit. If I'm going to be at a law firm, I'm going to be the managing partner of this firm. If I'm going to be in a corporate in-house department, I'm going to be the general counsel. That was the path. Why am I doing this if I'm not going to do it? Right. So for me, it was like, well, what does that path look like? In each of those cases, what does that path look like? What does it entail? What is the work that person is doing, not just to get there, but once they're there?
What are the prerequisites basically for me to be in that seat?
Well, but also, path is used generically when a lot of people talk about career, but I mean it in a very specific way. When I would look at managing partners of firms, when I would look at CEOs, when I would look at general counsels, I would notice something. In a large enough organization, there are people who are 2 or 3 levels below them who are, let's call it, in their 60s. And then there's the person leading that team, and they were in their 40s when they started that role. And what you realize is, at some point, they started at the same point. At some point along that path, they diverged. And I had this obsession with figuring out why, how did that divergence happen? And so I did a lot of information interviews. I talked with a lot of people about how do you get to this seat, right? How did you pivot here versus pivoting there? Where did you move when other people stood still? Like all of those different things. And there's a million different answers for it, a million different paths. But I realized that I could be intentional about finding those slingshot moments and being ready for them. And that's what I set about to do. And ultimately, it seemed just more interesting for me to do it in the path to be a general counsel than it did in the path to be a managing partner. But I think I could have done either of those two things. I was just really intrigued by the other at the time. I was in private practice and the other was outside. And so I decided that was the path I was going to look for. And that was the one I was going to try to reverse engineer. And then I was going to, I got this plan together and then I went about executing on that plan. But for me, it was always, if I'm here, take it to the top or else why else am I here? Why else am I doing what I'm doing if I'm not trying to perfect it in some way?
Yeah, I love that. You're pumping me up. I'm like, I'm about to start clapping in here. This is like, let's go, Tyrone. It's inspiring to hear that, especially because now you are in that seat. And whether it's, you're obviously it's a blend of like manifesting it, visualizing it, and then actually performing and having the required skill set, the characteristics. And you also it seems like you had mental models. Like you had a very, very clear picture as to what this looks like. How am I going to get there? What the delta is from where I am now to version 2.0.
Yeah.
How did you deal with, like, were there difficulties in between? Because I think sometimes, especially in the younger gen, they do what you're talking about. They often want to aspire to get to X, position.
Yeah.
But there's the in-between that's lacking.
Yeah.
And some people work on it and others don't want to work on it, but they still want that seat. And I'm curious, in between, did you deal with the difficulties of whether it was imposter syndrome, a little bit of anxiety? Like, I'm sure it wasn't an easy process to get to where you are now.
No. So for me, the emotion and the facts sit separately, right? So I can say, all right, how am I going to do this? How am I going to do this, right? So I'll talk about my career path. What are the skills that I need to have, right? When you start off, there is this idea that people are taught that a general counsel needs to know every single area of law that exists.
It's literally in the word.
Yeah. And that their company might ever need them for, to the same depth as a law firm partner who's been doing one singular area of law for 30 years. And that's just not true. However, there are some things you need to know generally, and they will change industry by industry. And so part of it for me was, let's map that out. What are those things at a minimum? What are those things for my industry? What are those things that are just really helpful no matter what industry I'm in? And then be honest, do I have those? Irrespective of how I feel about it, do I have those skills? No, I don't. So now, and we'll get back to this later, I liken this to the same reason why the elevator pitch is so important to me when I tell people to give that. Now I've got this stuck in my head. I've got these 5 things and I need these 7 other things. So every time a new opportunity comes up, right, at your company, at your firm, to maybe stretch outside, you've got a grocery list, right? If you don't, opportunity comes up. You can work on this corporate governance issue. You can work on this project finance issue. Maybe you've done a ton of project finance, but you've done no corporate governance, and you know that that's a skill that you need to start developing. Well, without that grocery list, it doesn't really matter which one you do. With it, you're hyper-focused on getting over there. Okay, so now I'm working on that. Now people know me that I work on that. Now I'm doing more and more about that. Now I'm dangerous enough. Maybe I go to join some trade organization. I'm doing some reading on the side. I'm doing these other things. I'm starting to work that. Now I've got that list. I've checked one off or started to check it off. Now I've got the next one. Got the next one. How I feel about going into it doesn't really matter because I've got that list and I know that I need to keep moving on that list. And so sometimes you feel like an imposter.
Mm.
When you start learning anything, it sucks, right? You feel like you don't know anything. You feel like you might not ever be able to really get it. You worry that you're not picking it up as quickly as, you think you should or someone else should or what have you. But you just keep putting one foot in front of the other, keep taking bites of the elephant. And at some point, you have eaten the elephant, right?
Mm.
At some point in the beginning, it seems like you were never going to eat that elephant. But at the end, you've eaten the elephant. And then you look up and you're like, oh, I actually gotten this. I've gotten that. People are now coming to me and saying, can you give a talk on this thing that was an ancillary skill set for me at the time and now is something that's more core? I think the intention of just, to your point, getting that list together, thinking it through logically, refining it, and then just starting to chip away at it is the middle part.
Mm.
And it's not perfect, right? The first time you do something, you're not going to do it well. You're going to be worried about it. It's going to be too slow. There will be times where people are wondering why you're doing this thing over here because you got to make sure you're actually doing your job, which is key, and finding ways to expand your aperture while still doing the thing you were hired to do and doing it at the quality level that people know you can do it. And so it's a slow, methodical process, but it actually happens a lot quicker than you think if you stick at that execution.
Mm.
And that was the biggest challenge for me is don't get distracted. Don't get distracted. Don't get discouraged. Just keep taking bites. And then, a year passes and you can see you've made real damage. Another year passes and you've made more, and it'll pick up steam. But in the beginning, it really is just trusting the process, like having a well-defined process and trusting the process and trying to do it in a way that doesn't overwhelm you. And where you also don't think I'm going to go from 0 to 100 in a year, in 2 years, in 5 years, right? The time will come if you just keep getting ready.
Mm.
At least that's the way that it's been helpful for me.
When you talk about focus, and especially now, it seems like we live in an age where there's endless distraction, to be honest, and there's always this new thing that you want to do, and you see people adding more to their plate versus subtracting. Like you constantly hear people, especially when it comes to self-development, personal development, career development.
Yeah.
Everybody looks to add to their bucket, right? A new course, a new trait, a new book. It's never actually doing an audit of whatever their life looks like and subtracting the noise. What is the process of focus for you, especially when I know your days can be chaotic, they're jammed, slammed, you have meetings all over the place, calls.
I wish I could say I developed a universal answer that, an answer that everyone could use. And it was just this beautiful thing. The reality is, for me, I have 3 little boys.
Mm.
I've been doing this work at a high level, and there's a lot of volume of work that has gotten done over the years. When you get busy enough, the things that subtract become clearer. Mm. I wish that I had a method for doing it before you got to that point, right? But it becomes clearer when you don't have time. So for anyone who's got a day or a week or 2 weeks where you look at the calendar and you literally are just fully scheduled and then something else shows up, you know immediately whether something is getting bumped to fit that thing in or not. But if you have a gap on the calendar, you can say, oh, maybe it'll work. And I think, some days I will have a gap right here or there. Maybe it's a work gap or whatever, but getting to points, especially when my kids were really young, where there's no time, you're dying, forces you into this place where you have to prioritize and you have to start saying no to things. There are a lot of things I said yes to and then had to say no to, and that made me feel crappy. And so I learned to stop saying yes as quickly or stop saying it as much because I hate saying yes and then going back and saying no.
No.
But there were times, there were boards I was on, like associate boards at the time for nonprofits. It just required a social calendar I couldn't maintain with little kids. And I had to say, look, I'm going to step back, right? I may show up and help with a couple things. We may do some donations, but I can't go out twice a month. To some bar thing where we're gonna raise money, but like I just can't do that. And so over time, just honestly, was getting busier helped me prioritize better, helped me think about how valuable each chunk of time was, and then it allowed me to be better over time. Right, I had to transition slowly, and I know a lot of parents get this. Transition very slowly away from certain things that I had previously committed to that were a routine that I just could not maintain. But now I'm very, very careful about what I add. I'm very careful about what I add. I'm very careful about not needing to subtract in most cases. And that's been really helpful. But it took me just kind of getting overwhelmed, if I'm going to be perfectly honest with you. Some people will present the super person thing.
Yeah.
But it took me getting overwhelmed and it's like, I just can't.
By virtue of being burnt out.
Yeah, once I got work, I got my family. If this is not one of those two things, it just loses. And then when I started to have time to reintroduce them as my kids got a little bit older, then I got really careful about what do I reintroduce, because it's not like I have a ton of free time. I'm not retired and empty nesting at this point. So, where can I reintroduce things and where can I do it carefully, and having real conversations with folks now. Like I have conversations all the time where someone says, "Hey, I'd like you to do this." And I say, "What is the time commitment?"
Before I commit, I want to understand.
Before I commit, what is it? And it sounds like it's common sense, but it's not. When you're younger, you just say yes.
Yeah.
People say, "Hey,
part of that is important,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
In terms of like raising your hand and being a go-getter, it's I guess part of the process of ascension, but at some point that turns the table.
It does. And at some point, being a little less overly nice, you realize it doesn't actually mean you're being mean. It just means you're being clear in your communication. And now all of you are avoiding a situation where people don't feel respected. Yeah.
Speaking of focus, you choose the renewable energy space. Once you transition out of Big Law, right? You hold different positions, Power Plus, Invenergy, and now Doral.
Yeah.
Why focus specifically on renewable energy when, to your point earlier, you work on transactions spanning healthcare, tech, you've done diversified industries.
Yeah.
Why specifically go and zone in on renewables?
It was something novel to begin with. Once I got into it, I fell in love with the industry. But initially it was just something novel. I had done, I've been in development my whole career. I love development. I love changing the character of communities and the built environment. I love the economic investment you can do in communities. I love the way that you can bring together all of these disparate considerations into one project. And this was something that was new. The scale was different, right? I'm not building a new building like an office building. We're building a power plant on a lot of land potentially in communities that maybe have never seen a development like that. Whereas a lot of times a skyrise is going up where there's another skyrise, right? And there's an ecosystem and a system to let a new skyrise be built. You're doing things that are first of their kind. I'd gotten that taste a little bit doing big shopping centers, Walmarts, things like that in some of these communities, but this was happening at a pace and in a scale that was different. And so some of it was just to get into a new side of development, a side where we were connecting more with the local communities, where we were hearing more from those communities, where we were getting to kind of understand the platonic form of what we were doing, as opposed to following a rubric because it had been done so many times before. And one of the cool things about power plant development, whether it's thermal, solar, wind, battery storage, hydrogen, what have you, is you're typically building in places where it's novel. You're typically building in places where people have never seen that. And the community hasn't seen you and you haven't seen that community. And so you kind of have to come into this with a much more open mind, I would say, and figure out a way that everyone goes home happy.
To collaborate, work together.
And it's a puzzle and it's
different
it's human. Yeah. And it keeps it very interesting. There's never rote. It's never rote. It's always fascinating. There's always funky stories that come up. There's always that human element, and it makes the work go faster. It makes the work easier. It makes the facts of the work stickier in your mind.
Having now been in the space for so long, why to you does renewable energy make so much sense for the U.S., the future of the U.S., dependability on it? Why is it so important, especially from the aspect, like think about the person who's listening to this who isn't in the space.
Yeah.
And when they think of renewable energy, they might think electric car and it stops there.
Yeah.
But you see it at a much deeper level.
I think the challenge that we run into sometimes with the way certain people see things is the nomenclature, right? We have to have words to call things, but a lot of the words become sometimes politicized, but sometimes just so aggressively associated with one specific variant, right? That every time the word is used, that's the only thing you think of.
Right.
And I think when renewable energy became a moniker, there are some people who associate it with this sort of far off experimental thing. And that's not really what it is, right? It's a power plant. We build utility scale power plants that once operational are part of the critical energy infrastructure of the United States. An attack on one of our power plants, just as an example, would be a national defense issue, right?
Mm.
What we're doing is within what we call our generation stack, there needs to be a diversity of generation and storage sources for our needs, our electrical needs, and our electrical security for the United States to be robust, right? And so we've got, what we would call dispatchable generation. We've got our coal and our natural gas fired thermal, anything where you can just kick the fuel in and turn it on. We've got our intermittent generation, which would be the solar and the wind, sometimes hydroelectric. And obviously, we've got our battery storage, which allows for any of that energy production, right, to be taken from the moment of production and moved to some other moment of need or demand, as we would say, because otherwise those electrons are just kind of lost, right? You need all of those things. We need all of the above. We've done a lot of the dispatchable generation in the United States. And obviously I haven't talked about nuclear, but it fits within there as well. We've done a lot of dispatchable generation in the United States. There's a lot of companies that do that very well. A lot of these older utilities. What we're trying to do, what some companies are doing is they're developing more of this newer technology to add to that stack, right? Because I think of it as though you were making, one type of food and someone else is making a different type of food, right? Nobody asks, Shake Shack why they decided to start making hamburgers and do they hate salads, right? It's just one of a different type of food that's being added to the diverse pot that people can choose from. And here, that's really what we're doing. Companies like Doral have seen great success developing the type of generation that we're developing, and solar and battery storage primarily, because there are places where it totally makes sense. There are places in this country where the generation stack is too dependent on one or another type of generation, or there are too many power plants that are starting to retire. They're at the end of their useful life, and even if we keep them, open, it's really hard to maintain them, and sometimes they just don't meet the current standards. And so those are areas where we need power. Those are areas where the retail utilities are saying we really need more power. And those retail utilities are saying we need power from all of these different categories. We'd like this much from this category, this much from that category, that much from that category. And we're just showing up in those places and filling some of that demand. But we see it as an all of the above approach that we're just a piece of. And, it's an exciting piece. The technology is still evolving rapidly. The quality of the solar panels, the quality of the manufacturer processes, all these things are improving rapidly, driving the price down. You look at the bin class of a solar panel you bought 2 years ago versus one you're buying today, and it's just today there's just a much more efficient panel.
Different, yeah.
That's fascinating to see. It's so interesting to look at. But yeah, we're really just in a novel space of the energy industry, but not outside of it or in a new industry. We're just folding ourselves in with the broader energy industry that's existed from time immemorial.
When you, obviously this is it's a very important role in a very important industry.
Yeah.
At a very critical time, one that's also emerging.
Yes.
Right? And you hear data centers, of course, and the growth of AI chips and AI in general, and where is that energy going to come from? And there are many sources, to your point, it's interesting you put it as like product lines.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating way to think about it. Where you sit, though, it's also tricky, right? Because part of it is legal, part of it is compliance, administration, risk management. It's almost like the heartbeat of the business. How do you deal both with sort of the pressure and you as Ty, as GC, CCO, maintaining the innovative curve?
Yeah.
Like the trend of what's coming, being open, being business forward, having the creative mindset. How do you balance the business part of your brain with the risk management part of your brain, especially where you sit at Doral?
Yeah. So some of it is I just have an amazing team. And then outside of my team, our team is LCO, legal compliance and operations, corporate operations, not plant operations. And then obviously the rest of the company is also filled with just amazing people. And that's a part of it, right? So I've got folks either on my team or outside of my team whose scope is not legal at all. And so when we liaise, we're not liaising from a legal, non-legal perspective. I don't have my lawyer hat on at all. Right? If I'm talking to someone about government affairs or people team, like I'm not typically coming to them from that gaze. We're talking about how do we manage this from an operational perspective. And then there are folks on the team where everything they do is legal. And we're talking about it legally. And I'm looking down right now. If I'm looking side to side or up, to my board, to my members, or to my CFO, my CEO, I am wearing each hat depending on my legal, my compliance, my corporate operations, depending upon what we're talking about. And sometimes with legal, it can be tricky to blend, and you try not to blend. You try to separate that out for a variety of privilege and other reasons. But with the others, sometimes you blend, right? The way I think about it is this: legal's job in a well-functioning organization is not to say, no, you can't do this. It's to say, here's how we can do this, right? And this has been said before by other people, probably in more eloquent quote ways, but that distinction is critical. Someone says, I'd like to start making, George Khalif coffee. There are some folks who would say, you can't make coffee. You have this other job. There'd be a conflict. What about the rules? How would you keep people from getting sick? What if you got a class action lawsuit? Blah, 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 blah. Big Starbucks is going to hurt. They would go through that whole thing. Others would say, okay, let's talk about it. We can talk about what the risks are. We can talk about what the rewards are. We can talk about what the steps look like to get from ideation to execution. And then we can just figure out how to deal with all these challenges along the way. And that second way is what you see in a lot of startups, is what you see in a lot of these tech companies, is what you see in the companies that continue to grow and innovate, is we still might get to the same place where you cannot open a coffee line. But the way we get there is through investigation, always moving under the idea that maybe we can.
Right.
Maybe we can't. Maybe there's enough smart people in this room, we can figure it out. It's a problem, we can figure it out. I say this to my kids all the time. If it was an easy problem, you would have the answer to it, and we wouldn't be talking about it, right? If someone asks you something you know the answer to, it's not a problem. It's just a question. If it's a problem, we don't know the answer at step one. Now we have to go figure it out. And that's kind of our role. In my mind, that's our role. And that's how we can blend those two, is by looking at, why are we here? I have a job. We are here because we have a business. And the business is, we build solar battery storage power plants. We partner with our rural communities, and we figure out ways to sort of economically improve those areas while also, building, owning, and operating in those areas. And we do so while incorporating, heritage farming, grazing, pollinator habitats, and other agrivoltaic components into all of our projects. But that's the business. I'm here to make sure the business thrives. I'm not here to tell the business why they can't do business. And everyone on the team understands that when we're doing it from that perspective, things work.
Yeah, because what you're talking about really is culture.
It is.
Right. It's almost like the Disney philosophy. And actually, my wife uses this a lot in conversations as a psychologist. I listen to her usually saying, that's a great point, Ty. And what I would add to that versus Ty, sounds great, but unfortunately, like, the reason it can't work. So the reason it's tied to culture is because if you do that, to your point, even though the answer is no, I can't create my coffee company.
Yeah.
At least we have the culture of, I can come to your office, knock on the door, proverbially, and say, Ty, can I have you for 5 minutes? I want to pitch you something.
Yeah.
If that wasn't the case culturally, I would never come to you in the first place. And over time, because of that, it's almost like a diseased root.
It is.
I probably leave the company, or I stay there and I'm miserable. I'm unhappy. We don't have a good rapport.
Or you do things, I find out about them later.
Correct.
Which we've seen
Not
that.
great. Yeah.
And that's the thing. And then that's also going back further into culture. You should feel comfortable coming to me, and I'm not going to shame you about it. I'm not going to tell you the stupidest idea I've ever heard.
Yeah, like, why are you even thinking about this? Yeah. You're not focused,
We always say this. There are absolutely stupid questions, but those are the most important ones to be asking, right? The most important ones to be asking. You get in my car and you don't know what the brake is? Ask that question, please. Like, we work through it.
Let's address it.
It's not a bad thing. It's just a thing. And look, going back to the team piece, all we can do from a position of leadership is set the tone. We have to have great people who will carry it forward. And we have these amazing people who are intrinsically motivated to help us all execute well. And that is another really good way why we can do what we can do. I don't have to worry that I have to be touching everything or else it doesn't get done, or else it doesn't get done well. I know that, we're all going to be randomly on the weekend or sometime doing something, and something's going to pop into our head about work. And I don't want you thinking about work all the time. I don't want you having dreams about work. But if the epiphany comes to you and you jot down a note, that's wonderful, because you are thinking, how can I make this better? How can I solve this problem? How can I move this forward? And when everyone is doing that, we're just going to do great work. But that's, I am always amazed at the quality of folks we have been lucky to have to date, because you can't do it on your own, right? We can't do what we do with just a handful of people. I can't do what I do with just me. I've got 10 people right now on the team and in various disciplines, and they are just outstanding, right? And that's the only way we get to do what we do.
What has, speaking really quickly about leadership, what has leadership taught you being in the C-suite that, going back to your days in law school, that you either didn't know about, were kind of surprised by,
So, I mean, probably a few things for sure. One of them is, and this is probably, you talked about people who are looking to maybe follow this path. Something that people don't always talk about is there will come a time when you can't do execution as much as you would like to, and you need to be strategizing. Knowing when that time has come is very difficult, and transitioning is very difficult. That's where the people come in. I have to be able to hand off some of this execution to other people so that I can strategize at a high level, and I have time to do that. And it's not just blocks of time, right? It's deep work. Sometimes you need to just be thinking about this problem, because your answer in 30 minutes on this problem is going to either help the company make 9 figures or lose 9 figures, right? Mm-hmm. And so you can't just roll off a piece of paper and say, now I'm going to move on to this point. You need other people to be managing that paper. So that's one thing, is the transition into leadership is tough, because there will be a point where you're being a leader and you're being an individual contributor at the same time. And it's just tough. But part of that will be learning to delegate and making sure you find the right people to delegate to. In an environment that allows you to delegate, because I've been in environments where they still want you because they're used to you.
Yes.
And it's just
like you're the de facto go-to,
It's untenable over time, right? The other thing about the leadership that has really stuck with me is just the communication piece. I give real-time feedback, positive and negative. People don't always like the negative feedback, but they trust me when I give it to them. I've, on the flip side, had people have an issue with something I did and not bring it up till 6 months later at a review.
You're like,
smile at me every day, right? And it's weird to me. It's I don't want to use a word that's a little too grand, but it's a very strange way to communicate and to run an organization. And so one of the things for me that has been critical is just, we're not family. Mm-hmm. We are a company. We work together. We're not family. But that doesn't mean that we have to be cold with each other. That doesn't mean that we don't have to celebrate each other. It doesn't mean that we either have this familial environment or we have this environment that's incredibly sort of just cold, I guess is the best word I can use. I can have a good rapport with these folks, and I can have the best rapport with them by being open with them. I'm open with them about what I can be open with them about. I'm open with them about what I can't be open with them about. I'm not weird about it. Say, hey, I can't talk to you about that, right? I can't tell you why such and such moved or left or changed groups or things like that. But I can tell you what I can. And that has been, a lot of times I saw leaders that were too standoffish. And I learned that you can treat people just like grown-ups, and we can be a team, and we can all understand the parameters, and we can communicate clearly about them. And then it works well.
Your delivery too, right?
Yeah.
Because the way you said, look, exactly what I can talk to you about. Yeah. This I can't, right? It's the how we message it.
Yeah.
Because that same phrase, if you told me Ty, I definitely can't talk. I mean, why would you be even asking?
Yeah.
That delivery, there's two different options.
No, that's right. Well, but then you don't have people worrying. Oh, what's going to happen to me? What's happening with this person? Or, is the company doing okay? Are they not? Is there some issue with me? There's an issue because I told you there was an issue.
There's certainty in your voice.
Yeah. And that I'm going to tell you when there's an issue. And that when we're going to hire somebody, I'm going to tell you when we're going to hire somebody. When I say to people, I don't know, certain people, I'm never going to layer you, or I'm never going to bring someone in over top of you. You trust that because I'm saying that to you directly. If I didn't say that to you, then that's not a certainty. But I try to make sure that folks are understanding of what we're doing and why we're doing it, and where they can't know it, where you cannot know the answer to that question. That's part of my job, right? Everybody's got buckets where they just have to keep those things largely to themselves and those that sit above them in the chain. And I think that to me, the trust, right? The trust and the comfort that I try to instill in folks, and hopefully I have, obviously I can't speak for them, but hopefully I have, is something that, you're empowered to do as a leader. You don't have to be weird and standoffish because another leader is weird and standoffish. You can lead your team in the way you want to lead your team, generally speaking. And that's something that just didn't occur to me. It felt like it would take, approvals and a variety of other things, and you realize you can just be a different human being, and one that's trying to make sure that the cohesion is high.
Mm. Let's pivot to the impact piece, because now I feel like you've given us really good, coverage on at least in the 1 hour that we've had together, of your career, your personal story, things that make you tick and how you think about leadership. And leadership has so many different forms.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I always admire about friends, leaders in my circle, is how much time they dedicate outside of their bubble of work, career, and they dedicate it to the civic duties, especially in the city that they live in and they actually care about. And you've done a lot of great work specifically focused on, anti-hunger.
Yeah.
I want to kind of ask you the one question is, why devote time to social impact? Why is that important to you? Especially, you have a family, high pressure job, and why focus on hunger out of everything else that you could focus on?
We can't get to do any of the stuff that we typically talking about around business, around how we involve our lives, how we move our families, if we're worrying about some of our fundamental needs. That, and there's, lots of social science around that is what will wind up just consuming your time and your energy and your day and the resources that you have, right? And I do firmly believe that it's a fundamental right that everybody should be, in a position to not die because they lack, right? So they're not going to freeze when it's cold outside. They're not going to starve. They're not going to die of thirst, especially in a place where there's so much warmth and food and liquid, right?
Yeah.
And so, I grew up in a community where there was food insecurity, and I got to see it from a very interesting vantage point because I grew up in the church. And so, there were always these big meals on Sunday after church, and they were in the basement of my grandfather's church. And, there were some families that would take home several foil wrapped plates afterwards. And you knew that they didn't have a lot of food. And so they were going to eat those for several days, but everything was always made in these big buffet styles. There was always food. And so there were some folks who got many of their meals from coming on Sunday. There were people who gave out snacks to kids in the summertime when we were out playing, not because they were part of the summer backpack program, just because they knew that it would take pressure off of some of the other parents. There were folks there that when I look back, I knew got, 3 square meals a day, largely because of the community in which they lived. Mm. And, they ate breakfast and lunch at school, right? And they, got dinner, at someone else's house. There were people I knew who were over at the neighbor's house every night for dinner. And you realize that that was just something the neighbor could do. And so I saw the benefit of that when I saw communities where they didn't have that community and where some people were struggling while their neighbors weren't. And I always thought that was a beautiful thing, but it was also something that felt very unnecessary. It felt very unnecessary that you had people in these communities who were working, who were trying to do what they could, still couldn't afford some of the basic items. And, there's a policy systemic solution that I think can be implemented. Who knows if it will, but I think hunger is so immediate that while we're working on these policy solutions, we also need to be feeding people because you need to eat right now, right? It's after lunchtime. You and I are going to eat at some point later on today. You need to be eating every few hours. And so when I see some of these initiatives that are, focusing on anti-hunger, focusing on food insecurity, it feels like the basic level to start if you want
for anything else. Yeah.
If you want to give your time back to help improve the lives of others, you have to make sure that they're able to live that life, right? And so, and it's not to say that you should, only go to hunger charities and not go to other charities, but for me, it's very simple. For me, it's very straightforward. It's always been something that has been a part of my life. I also love food. I cook all the time. We donate a bunch of food. We donate a bunch of money to hunger organizations. I donated time. I've sat on the board of organizations before. It's something that my wife and I are passionate about. And it's something that I think is because it's so fundamental, you feel good knowing that you've made a small dent. You feel good knowing that these people went home.
Well, there's direct impact, right?
There is direct impact.
Individually, within a family.
And you see them again.
You can track.
You see someone at the pantry the next week or the next month. And you know that they're going to eat again. And you see that they made it through those prior weeks or months because they ate, in part because they ate. And it just...
It's tough too, I'm assuming, for those individuals, of course. I mean, hunger, it's physically painful. but also I think emotionally it hurts your self-esteem, your confidence, that the most basic, bare minimum element in life, aside from water, of course, that you need to sustain that. We're not talking about, upgrading your fashion or the type of job or position. Like this is, I think for a lot of people here, like you have to put yourself in the shoes of the individual coming to the food drive and asking for something that to us, we barely think about.
Yeah, look, and I've been involved with many organizations. I would say Beyond Hunger, out of Oak Park, First United Church probably does it better than anyone I've ever seen. They do such a great job, and look, all organizations do it, but I see they do such a great job at making sure that the experience of getting services or resources at a food pantry is a dignified experience.
Yeah, which is incredible. I mean, you need that too. It's not just
you need it. And we saw it during the pandemic.
Yeah.
You see upticks during the pandemic. You saw upticks in people who needed it, and you actually saw a downshift in organizations that could supply it, because a lot of pantries have a small budget and are mostly staffed by volunteers. Many of them were retirees who were the most vulnerable population during the pandemic. And so you actually saw less resources in terms of, spread out geographically and more need. And, it was critical then, right, to make sure that people felt embraced. They felt, their dignity. They felt that this is something that's okay, and this is something that just happens sometimes in our society, unfortunately, but it does happen, and that there are resources here. Because in some of these cases, it's not that these people had, $0. It's that they got food and didn't have to decide between eating and paying the light bill. And so they were able to better balance, sometimes, less than enough money, less than enough resources, less than enough time for their family, so they could make it through another month, another week, hopefully another quarter, another year. But yeah, it's one of those things that I wish I could wave a magic wand and make go away. It's one of the reasons why I work, is to, be able to have time and money to give to these initiatives. But it feels wonderful to be able to help, even in the lowest place. And it's one of those things that like just sticks with you, because you think about the position folks are not in, because they've been able to get these resources.
Right.
Because I've seen people who are in those positions, and I just think about not doing what I can to avoid having more people in those instances that I saw growing up every day.
Yeah. Kudos to you, man. That's it's easier said than done. A lot of people have the platform, and no judgment, but they don't allocate the time and effort and resources to help. So finding a cause that's special to you, and personal to you, and actually doing something about it is very admirable, as I said from the beginning. We're currently recording this, is December 1st.
Yeah.
We got a month left in this year. Looking at 26, what are you excited about?
26, I'm honestly excited about a couple of things. So for our industry, I'm just excited about a lot of more developments that are going to be coming online, a lot more power. I'm excited about, our power needs, right, are increasing exponentially. We've got AI data center development, we've got crypto mining, we've got just the general electrification of everything, which I think sometimes gets lost in this discussion, which is like everything in this world needs more and more electricity. And, for the individual widget and the cloud computing that is backing it up. And so we just need more energy. And one of the things that's happening, many of the things that are happening, are around how do we get this energy online quicker? How do we, reform our interconnection process? How do we reform the permitting process? How do we deal with aging infrastructure in a more time-effective way? How do we deal with supply chain constraints? Again, so they don't become the long pole in the tent. How do we get more power on the grid quicker? There've been so many discussions at the state and federal level around those and around those pieces I just mentioned. And so I'm excited in 26 to see all of that move forward. Some of it's already moving forward. Some laws have been passed. Some initiatives have been started. Some coalitions have been formed, with the end result of just getting more power on the grid, making sure that people don't have blackouts and brownouts. From a hunger perspective, food insecurity perspective, I'm excited to just get more involved in local organizations. I live on the North Shore now. My wife and I have gotten more involved in North Chicago Community Partners, which is a wonderful organization that's helping a lot of families that need it in and around North Chicago, Illinois. And so, we're not subtracting, we're adding to the universe of things that we're doing. But that is something I'm super excited about. And honestly, the Eagles going back to the Super Bowl now. Go Birds.
I don't want to bring that up. The recent game against the Bears. There's no.
I love both teams.
No foul. No.
I love both teams.
Yeah.
But
That was a fun game. It's a
Mhm.
fun game. Yeah,
Was.
a lot of great sports teams to choose from in
Yeah.
Philly. Well, thanks for grabbing coffee, man. I appreciate it. You have a stellar story. I personally, I think, learned a lot from just this conversation. Even though I feel like I know you now, and we've had a couple of similar like conversations.
Yeah.
I wish you the best.
Yeah.
You have a fan in your corner, no matter what, and
I-
just keep hammering it.
Yeah. Look,
It's a pleasure.
it's been wonderful to be here and kind of talk about these things in the way that you formulated them because they're all important, but sometimes, without the right structure, they kind of get lost in the broader meandering. So no, I appreciate you having me here. I appreciate
Thank you, Ty.
all of it. Thanks, man.
Cheers.